Here's Brody Brazil.
The Sharks are down to Logan Couture, Marc-Edouard Vlasic, and Kevin Labanc. That's basically it from the, quote, old era. So seeing that and understanding that, is it fair to say that the teardown portion of the rebuild is essentially complete?
Yes. I'll be interested to see with how much cap space they're going to have this summer. What does Mike Grier do with that? Because he's got two options. Either he tries to bring in a couple of maybe mid-range free agents to improve the team a bit on the ice, or do you go to other contending teams that have bad contracts they want to get rid of so they can sign somebody and get draft capital out of it? So I'll be interested to see how he uses his cap space this summer, because either way, it's going to make the team better down the road. It's just a matter of whether or not you want to improve for next season or if you're going to kick the can down the road just a little bit.
And because you've watched so many rebuilds happen across the league in recent times, as the Sharks try to get back to where they were before, like annual playoff contention, maybe even Stanley Cup contention at a certain point, can you identify some of like the major milestone moments that need to happen for the Sharks from now until whenever they're back?
You know, trying to measure when a team's out of a rebuild is tough. I know Ottawa felt they were out of it a year ago. They're not.
Right.
It really is a matter of, so you get your young core. So for San Jose, that'd be, Smith comes in and plays, and you've got other improving young players with the team. I like Bordelot. I think there's a lot there with Bordelot if he can get the defensive side up as well. Love Eklund's game as well. So there's a lot of good young pieces there. And then it's about adding the right veterans, adding the right guys to come in that can kind of shepherd you along. I think what Yzerman's done in Detroit has been really smart. I know it's taken a little bit longer than some people might like, but like Detroit, I think they went out, they got Kane at the exact right time. I don't know if they're going to make it, but like Detroit, in my opinion, is done with the rebuild. Now they're in the playoff conversation. So for San Jose, if they're going to go the long route, it's probably going to be a while. And it feels like they've sold off so much. I don't think a quick turnaround is going to happen anyways in terms of playoffs. But I've been impressed. Like I was one of the few, I think I was one of maybe 3 people on planet Earth that saw the Hertl trade and went, that went all right for San Jose.
Yeah.
That went all right.
That was my next question, because it was a shocker, right? And not in a sense that it was off or on the table, but the fact that it actually happened at the very last minute of the deadline. And we just thought Hertl was a complicated puzzle piece. Like he could fit well somewhere, but it was just a different piece, a difficult piece to fit somewhere else. And it was also sentimentally tough, right, for Sharks fans. Yes. But I agree with you. I think it actually, in about 3 years in reverse, is going to make a ton of sense, because he's just not going to fit in this team optimally for the next couple of years.
Well, and I was thinking back too, one of the reasons I want to give them the benefit of the doubt is because last year, Timo Meier gets dealt to New Jersey. Everybody's like, what is this return? This is awful.
Yeah, no, it wasn't.
He's been producing really well. I think they've done well with the assets that they got in that trade. I think that while Meier's picked it up lately with the Devils, that contract doesn't make any sense for San Jose. And the Hertl contract with them going forward, they create so much cap space with that trade. I don't like that they use the retention slot either. They don't have a retention slot left, but they don't really need one either because they're not trading another veteran on a big contract. So those retention slots shouldn't be a problem. But I think that with Hertl, when you look at his age, when you look at that contract, I don't think that contract was going to get easier to move as time went on, especially with him being injured at the deadline. So I think they did well with Vegas.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Meier trade. That's really the only one to date that wasn't kind of a salary maneuver type move for Mike Grier, in a sense that the Timo Meier trade was the only one he's done so far where he actually got some toys to play with in return in the instant time. William Eklund and Fabian Zetterlund, you talked about them. They've shown a lot of growth this year, maybe among the most growth on San Jose's roster. You were kind of talking about this before. To keep that trend going, like what do you need to surround players like that with on a roster next year? Is it an aging veteran who's got a little bit more to prove, or what's an optimal Sharks roster surrounding those guys look like next year?
Well, I think when you're doing the build up, you start with figuring out, okay, we need to figure out who our goaltender is going to be through this. So whether it's going to be a young guy or whether it's going to be somebody to bring in or whoever, make sure that you've solidified that goaltending, and then really work on the defensive side. Their defense this year hasn't quite been up to par. Right. you work on that over the offseason, really make it a team that's really hard to score against, and then, maybe add a third liner here and there. Obviously, you're not going to get those prime, like Sam Reinhart's not going to sign with the Sharks kind of thing. Like, I'd be very surprised if that happened.
That's what I was hoping you would say, but okay. I was hoping that he would sign. Yeah, sorry.
They have the cap space. The one thing is Reinhart wouldn't have the line mates in San Jose that he's had in Florida.
Right.
So that contract probably doesn't age well right out of the gate, because he wouldn't be able to score at that same rate. Like, Reinhart's scoring well. He's playing great hockey. I don't think he scores 50 again next year. It does feel like he's having a career year. So I can't really use Buffalo either. I want to use Buffalo, but they never get out of that bloody rebuild. They're never going to be any good. I always want to have faith in Buffalo, and they're just never any good. It's the same thing this year with New Jersey. Every time I'm like, okay, they're going to turn, and then they don't.
Yeah.
But it's the depth guys. So for San Jose, I would think adding depth guys, picking up, guys on $3-4 million a year contracts, not dissimilar to what Chicago did, bringing in Foligno, bringing in Perry in the offseason. Obviously, the Perry thing didn't work out that well, but that kind of thing where you're bringing in guys who can shepherd along the players. They understand what their role is, and I think San Jose would be smart to make those kinds of additions. But definitely make sure you get your goalie and you get your defense built up, and then you go from there.
Shepherding is a great word. I'm going to use that term on television because that fits the situation perfectly. And by the way, I do think Mackenzie Blackwood is the goalie that they've kind of handpicked and selected for the near future for their team. And I like what he's done so far this year. It's difficult to judge David Quinn's work based on what he's been given, the roster that's been taken away from him, a captain who's been injured all of 5 or 6 games this year. Where do we start with kind of like where he stands or what he's been doing for this team? And I'm saying that in a sense of I hope they stick with him. I think he deserves that opportunity to keep going with this.
I think so too. And I think because the expectations for the Sharks were low anyways, I don't think there's any reason to change the coaching staff necessarily. The only way that I think that a change would happen is if they weren't happy with the development of the young players. If they felt like our young players aren't, being used the way we want, but I haven't seen anything like that in the media. I haven't heard anything like that through any of the grumblings through anybody really. So I don't think there's any danger to David Quinn's job at this point. When the team starts expecting more, then there's going to be more expected of them. But yeah, I don't see any reason to make a change.
Macklin Celebrini last week was nominated for the Hobey Baker, youngest player in college hockey to obviously be nominated for that. He's also the youngest player in college hockey this season. Did score a goal in that Hockey East Championship game. Obviously didn't get the 4 goals that Will Smith got, but that's a different story. Look, maybe it's the Sharks who get him. Maybe it's somebody else who picks him. And I think you and I talked back in December. We thought, he's probably going to be the number 1 pick. Now I think we're assuming he's the number 1 pick. But my question,
he's number 1.
My question now is, does he automatically play or not play in the NHL next season? And maybe is that based on who picks him?
It may depend on who picks them, but there's been some recent instances where a player goes to the NHL right away and it doesn't necessarily work, like Slafkovsky in Montreal. I know Seattle's tried that with Wright. It's still kind of a mixed bag. It might be better for Celebrini, at least for that 1 year after the draft, to just play NCAA and get that 1 more year of development before signing an NHL contract. Every player's built differently. Like, one reason it's worked for Bedard is because he's built like a truck. Like, Bedard was physically ready. He was physically ready in junior. Like, it was insane. So when people were like, oh, he might end up like Lafreniere, I was like, no, he's way more NHL ready and a way higher skill level than Lafreniere. So even though Bedard's physically shorter than a lot of the guys, he's just so strong and he's so hard to move off the puck. So I mean, if Celebrini had that kind of upside, but I think it would probably be in his best interest to play another year in the NCAA.
Yeah, and I think last year's draft was a little bit of an aberration in producing a couple NHL-ready players. I don't know that doesn't normally happen every year, so wouldn't be a surprise if he doesn't. Okay, last question here, and then this is based on the Sharks, but this could apply to any other team that's near the bottom of the league standings. Is it prudent for fans of any bad team to actually kind of down the stretch here sit and hope that they don't gain points, that they don't win games, that they do finish closer to last in the standings or last so that they can have a 25% chance. I think that's what it is in the lottery of picking first. Is it a good idea, basically, for any fan base to at least consider the notion of tanking feels good?
It'd be hypocritical for me to say no. Last year, when the Canucks fired Bruce Boudreau, and I was like, all right, there's no chance of playoffs. Don't worry about winning games. And then Tucker comes in, they won a bunch of games, and I was like, are you kidding me?
Right.
There's a generational talent in this draft, and you guys just moved up a whole bunch of draft spots. Oh my gosh. Like I was so torn, because like it's fun to watch them win, but like you really want that top draft pick. And so, yeah, I was definitely rooting for more losses from Vancouver than we got. And like, I knew the schedule got easier when Tocchet took over, and I was really concerned, which I know sounds weird, but I really wanted like as high of a prospect as possible out of that draft. And yeah, so I do understand the tanking fans that are like, oh, we won again. Did you see that last night? Now we're like, I think it's the idea of now we're winning. Now that we can't make the playoffs, now we're winning. Oh, cool. Great. So glad we won that game in late March. Why couldn't we win them in October? So I get it.
I want competitive performance. I want individual growth, and I want the consolation prize. There's still
I want a team that tries really hard and loses.
Yeah, well,
that's what. Yeah.
If you're going to come this close to the prize, why not take the prize? And it's because I love the Sharks so much, and I want so much for them to be back where they belong 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And this is one proven way to do it.